Okay, let me just make sure the sound is off here. Ooh, that was cranked up to 100%.
Gross.
Okay, so tonight's class is actually going to be about the 3 fundamental keys of language learning. And so I'll just go ahead and let you know what those keys are up front. The first one is comprehensible input, basically exposure. Second one is comprehensible output, using what you know. And the third one...
Somebody wants to.
Oh. There we go. And the third one, I'm going to cheat a little bit and break it into 2, review and feedback. So the first one I'm going to dive into a little bit this evening is going to be that comprehensible input and why that's really important. And so I want to bring out a study that was done in 1999. It was called the Hart-Risley study, and you can actually read up on it in the Scholastic Compendium. I have it on our resources page, but basically it was a 10-year study that was done to analyze what the correlation was between exposure of language and the acquisition of language in children. And so basically what they found out is that in some cases there was a 30 million word gap in certain children. And so for some of these kids, by the time they were 3 years old, some of them were exposed to 45 million words, watching TV or interacting with their parents, talking with other children, just, every day, that exposure. And so that accumulated to like 45 million words. But then on the other side of that spectrum was these children that were exposed to about 15 million words over that 3-year period. But the correlation between their acquisition of language was really interesting. The acquisition of language was for the higher end, for those kids that were exposed to 45 million words. Their vocabularies at 3 years old were about 1,200 words, compared to on the lower end of that spectrum of 500 words. So more than double. So that's why exposure is really important, and it's a key aspect to learning a new language. And sign language is no different. So we know that we need to expose ourselves to a new language if we want to learn it, right? Exposure, immersion. Those are things that we're kind of familiar with, but how do we do it? And that can be a bit of a struggle. They want you to sign.
You start signing and talking, and then all of a sudden you stop.
Oh, signing, simcomming.
Simcomming?
You simcom and then you stop.
I did?
Yeah.
Because I love to see you practicing while trying to catch some stuff while you talk.
Well, that's a good thing.
You can do it.
Yeah, the reason why I usually don't do that and we will interpret for each other is because it's a little harder to focus on what you want to say when you're signing at the same time. So you'll either sign good or you'll talk good. And you're going to have to pick which language is going to suffer.
Unless you're skilled, it's a hard skill to acquire, but it is, it's a lot of fun if you can, but it's really hard to do well. Unless that's just something you're really good at.
And it depends on the kind of signing that you're using. What we'll kind of go into the grammar structure of ASL, but it's really different from English. And so that's why some people are against SimCom because one of the languages is going to suffer. And usually it's the sign language, it's the ASL, because we're going to be voicing, right? But the signs aren't going to match the ASL grammar. And so usually it kind of morphs into PSE or even sometimes C sign. Years ago when we got our first certification through the ESSE, and it's a really English-based certification.
That was the best test I ever took in my life. I had the best time.
Yeah, we have different experiences from that.
I offended the test proctor because I laughed.
But anyways, when we took that... we took that certification, and at the time we were very strict ASL because that's the way we were taught. And if we signed anything in grammatical English, they would slap us on the wrist, no, stop that. That's not ASL. So we took the certification, and there's a aspect of the exam where they grade you on speech readability. And so if you're familiar with ASL, you usually don't mouth the words that you're signing. Usually you're using mouth morphemes or facial expressions, right? So as I was doing the interpreting, I was doing mouth morphemes. I was doing facial expressions. Oh man, I choke every time.
He bombed
Anyways,
that test because it went against everything that he was taught to do, and he didn't understand how to do it any differently because he was so ASL. I was too, but me, because of at that particular time I had a very English student, so I learned real quick how to mouth and do these things that you normally wouldn't do in ASL.
Right.
So where he did everything right for ASL, that test failed him for that certification because it wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't English. My boss was pissed, not at him, but at that test. She hates that test.
It was sad because it was that category that brought me just below passing. It's like for California, you need a 4.0 or higher. And if I remember, I think it was 3.8 that I had. And it was that speech readability that put me under that bar. So I had to go and take that test again. And it's like a 4 or 5 month turnaround. So you have to like wait 3 months to take the test. And then you have to wait like 5 months to get your results back.
Process.
Yeah. And it's not fun.
The best time doing that test because they set up this stupid little bear. And I said, what's that? And like, oh, that's your student that you're going to be interpreting for. And I'm like, okay. So I'm not a nervous test taker. I am who I am, and that's how I go. So I sat there and just, I'm like, done. And then we had to do the receptive, which was stupid because they made you write it out in English. And so the one part that, like, the ASL one, I did well. The PSE was my best, but the C sign, I actually did really well because I cheated because I can read lips extremely well. And the C sign deaf were mouthing every word, and I went, got it. And so like I passed that one. He goes, how did you pass? I said, couldn't you read their lips? He goes, no. He goes, I wasn't focusing on their mouth. I said, I was. As soon as I realized they were doing it, I'm like, oh, score. Got it.
Everybody else in the room is like sweating bullets. And she's laughing.
I'm laughing. I'm like, this is fun. And the test proctor was mad. She's like, most people struggle with this kind of thing. I said, your test was great. I said, thanks. I said, it prepped me. This is where my lack of tact came in. I said, it prepped me for the real exam. Thank you. And he goes, why would you say that? Because that certification is slowly being phased out. And it's the bigger certifications now, like the EIPA and the RID National, that means something. So for me, that was like practice. And I was like, cool. But yeah, it was
probably more than you wanted to know about interpreting.
I know. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead. Keep going with what you do.
Okay. I know he's chewing on a can of compressed air, and I just want to. Anyways, so increasing your exposure, how do you do it? So one of the easiest ways is just to watch more videos, right? And there's no shortage of videos, but it might be a little hard to widen out. And so if you search ASL on YouTube, a few will pop right up to the top. You'll have Bill Vickers, ASL Meredith, ASL that, and these are some of the really common YouTube channels, and they're really great. Bill Vickers and ASL that in particular are deaf instructors of language instructors. ASL Meredith is somebody that has gone to, she has a few degrees in ASL. She is hearing, but she'll do like voiceover on her own videos, so you can listen as she teaches, which is really nice. But then it can be where I would go from there. Or maybe you want to find something that is a little more your style, or maybe something that is a little more entertaining. So over the past few months, we've been compiling different YouTube channels, and we have an entire resources page, which I shared on the group. But like Shannon Rogan, Niall DeMarco, Sign Duo, Sign with Heart. And so there's lots of various YouTube channels that, don't feel shy to try different things. The Daily Moth is another really good one. It's basically a news brief every day. They'll do a recap of the news all in ASL, and I think they have captions on there as well. And so, find something that really clicks with you, because what might happen is that we find one channel, or maybe we find one source, and it's very interesting at first, and then the novelty can wear off, and we get bored and tired, and we might just give up because it's not fun anymore. And so it's really important to keep things novel and keep things new, and keep finding things that engage you in that learning. And also, there's movies and TV shows and kid shows and music, interpreted songs. And a couple TV shows. There's one coming out really soon on, I think it's Netflix. It's Deaf U, and it's about Gallaudet, and that's the Deaf University that's in Washington, D.C., been established since Abraham Lincoln. It's a really fascinating history, but they're going to be doing about what Gallaudet is today and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. Another one that's out right now, and I think you can watch it free online, is Switched at Birth. So that's a really good one because it incorporates hearing and deaf culture, and it really touches on kind of the aspects of both ends of that. And if that's something that you're unfamiliar with, it's a kind of a great introduction to how the deaf kind of perceive the world. And in their eyes, usually there's this split. There's a hearing world, and then there's a deaf world. And that TV show really does a good job of explaining kind of both perspectives. And sometimes the naivete of hearing people. Sometimes we just don't understand, or there's a lot of ignorance to what that culture is. And there's a lot of great actors and actresses, and they do a deep dive into a lot of these things. So those are good ways to kind of do that, increase your exposure in a wide variety of ways, and also to keep yourself engaged.
Deaf U was actually out on Netflix.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I watched. I don't know if they're doing a second season, but I watched the first season. Really good. They signed super fast. Jesus. But what I noticed in watching them sign was that you can always tell the difference between a person who clearly this is like a new language for them, and then someone who it's their first language, because I'm trying to find a better word than lazy. But they sign really casually and comfortably,
right.
And you realize like the difference in what it looks like to see a sign signed by a teacher or someone who's teaching you versus somebody who that's just their first language. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then in researching Deaf U, just kind of learning a little bit about what the show was, and watching Myra Margo's interviews and stuff like that. A lot of people were concerned about the captioning of that show by Netflix. And I'm actually going to ask you guys about that, just in gaining exposure and watching different movies, like the Super Deafy and Hammer and like all these different deaf movies that I've watched. Like, some people say the captioning can be good, some people say otherwise. Like, how do you determine, like, how do you find out who did the captioning or whether or not it's right, just as a beginner, instead of just like relying on it to be the right caption?
Right. And that's really tricky because in many instances, it's easier to interpret from English into ASL, but it's really hard to go from ASL to English, just because there's a lot more variability there, and there can be a lot more shades of meaning. Mostly because we can attach a lot of the same, you can attach a lot of English words to the same sign. And that can be a really nuanced thing. Like, maybe you have angry versus furious versus just roaring mad. So like, this is like angry, right? So, this is a little angry. Or like this would be, you're absolutely furious. And so depending on the emotion behind it, the facial expressions, the context of the situation, there's a lot of nuance that can go into the meaning and the interpretation and the translation of what's being signed. And so sometimes the same thing can be interpreted a couple different ways. I'm trying to think of what there's a late show, and I forget who it was, but they had 3 ASL interpreters on stage, and they were interpreting the same thing,
Mhm.
and they were all doing it differently.
They were
And
doing
so,
that song, the Black and Yellow, that rap song that they have, and they had 3 different interpreters, professional interpreters up there interpreting the song, and each one was doing it differently. But it was the same. They were saying the exact same thing, but their interpretation of the song was different. And the point behind that was there's so many variations to how you can sign something, but still get the same point across. It's just it's signed differently. But yeah, that was pretty amazing to watch. And it was funny too because they were getting all kinds of it.
yeah, and here I go again.
What is wrong with you?
Well, and like music is kind of a really good tangent on that too. Is music can be really hard to interpret because you can't. You're not just translating the words, right? And you really have to analyze. And there was a song that you were interpreting.
Which one?
A couple songs come to mind, like the song "No." You had to do that at like our school rally.
Man, I hated that
Like,
song.
my sign is
my
no.
name is no.
My name is no. It's Meghan Trainor, I think, does that song.
Oh, God. Especially because it was last minute, and I'd never heard the song in my life until that moment, and I'm like, what? I don't know what that means. And my boss was sitting there watching me, and she thought it was funny and laughed. I'm like, you. But yeah, there's that. There's so many variations to it. Or one of the biggest songs I had to interpret at a high school rally was the Bohemian Rhapsody song. That was fun. And only because I knew the lyrics, because everybody knows the song. So that was by far one of the, I had the best time doing that song. But the fun part about that song is when you go to interpret or to sign it, what he says isn't what he means.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things that are said in that song that if you were to interpret it literally, doesn't make any sense. So when you have to reshape the meaning. And like, what is he really saying? Oh man, had the best time.
How did you do Scaramouche?
I have to,
Interpret
I
the
had
dance.
to. Well, no, I had to. See, I can't remember now because I did it like 2 years
You know,
ago.
yeah, we should record you and put it somewhere.
I had to. At that time, I finger spelt it, but I knew what was it? What does he say? Fandango. I know that was a dance, so I interpreted that word and then I did the dance. But I had to like go home and like Google what that word meant because I was like, what is that? And I don't remember what it means now, but yeah. But that's a very, wouldn't call it a beautiful song, but it's very, if you, it's a good example of.
It's not like a surface interpretation.
Yeah, there's
it's
a deep
like really
meaning.
deep.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I like doing that one.
Yeah. But it reminds me of, there was this deaf friend of ours that she invented the sign for the sign vamoose.
Oh my God.
And so like, this is a sign for moose, right? And so she would do va moose. And it's totally not a sign at all, but like.
She did that to me and I went, what? Like, what did you just do? And she laughed. And
yeah,
then
like
she,
there's
explained
lots
it.
of, ASL puns. Like it's like rule of thumb, underwear, understand, who knows.
All
And there's like
kinds of
lots of
stuff.
like ASL English puns, but tangents.
How did you get on this?
I don't know.
I
Closed
fell
captions.
into it.
That's what
Oh,
happened.
okay. Yeah.
But anyways, might be able to find out a little bit as far as who does the captioning with a little bit of research. As far as like who did the captioning on Deaf U, I would imagine the ones that were portrayed in that series probably gave them the transcriptions of what they said. That's really what could ensure the best translation is, oh, this is what I meant. And these are the words that I meant to portray. And if you're trying to translate or try to interpret what somebody else is saying, you could have various interpretations and all of them be correct, but maybe that's not what that one person meant. So if you want the most accurate, then that person would close caption themselves. Like Ashley Clark from Signed with Heart for her YouTube channel and Instagram, she does her own closed captioning. So she, like, those are going to be on point because that's what she types in there, right? So yeah, closed captions it's a big world, and don't want to get too sidetracked. So let's just go ahead. Key number one, try to increase your exposure to the language. The more exposure you can achieve, the faster you'll actually, pick up on the vocabulary, and the quicker you can become fluent in that language. And secondly, it's that comprehensible output. And this is basically just using what you have been learning and putting it into real world practice as quickly as possible. Because our minds are really not reliable machines. Statistically, if we learn something today, we're going to forget about half of it tomorrow. If we don't review that information in 28 days, that drops to 18%. So, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that really is true. So one of the things that we can implement is, reviewing things a little bit more often. And so we have to get that information from our short-term memory, transition it into a midterm memory, and then solidify it into our long-term memory. And that means that we kind of have to go back to it over and over again. And so the quicker we can put what we're learning into real-world practice, the more that's going to stick. And that's why we kind of structured this course the way we did. We're going to expose yourself to a variety of resources on this one subject. We're going to throw you into an environment where you can immediately put into practice what you learned that day. And that's going to really help solidify what you've learned that day and help it stick a little bit better tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And the more we can continually use these, what we learn, it's going to stick longer and longer. And do I have it under this category? I'm just going to go ahead and include it. High frequency language. And this is probably something that you might have heard before, but high frequency language is basically the words that we use the most. And, introductions and, hey, how are you doing? How's the weather? What did I have to eat? Where am I going? Not public transportation, but like, getting into a car and, your day in, day out routines. And so focusing on what we talk about the most and learning that is actually going to help us become fluent much faster, because it's going to be language that we use again and again and again. And it's going to really speed up that process from short-term to midterm to long-term memory. Whew, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Would you like me to talk?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So another thing we want to think about it too is to not be afraid or too embarrassed to make mistakes. One of the children don't get embarrassed when they make a mistake when they speak.
Uh-oh.
What?
I'm losing focus. There we go.
Losing focus? Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
They take it and they're like, oh, okay, I mean, oh, well, whatever. As we get older, we develop this embarrassment as we get older when we make mistakes and things. And that's one of the things when you're learning a language, you want to try really hard not to do. We all make mistakes. Some of them are pretty bad. I've got stories, but I won't share them, of some pretty bad and embarrassing mistakes. But don't allow those mistakes to hinder you, because those mistakes are what's going to help you learn. Our mistakes are our greatest teacher. You make that mistake and you will never do it again. And it's one of those things that helps you progress in the language. Mistakes are natural. We all made them. He made them. I made them. But it's definitely, we want to get over that fear and embrace our mistakes, because they're great teachers, but they're also fun stories later when you can laugh about it. Being able to laugh at yourself, to be like, oh man, that was not what I was trying to say. Okay, sorry, let me say it again. Or a very common mistake, I'm just going to throw this one out there because everybody has made it. I have friends who have made it, and it's just one of those funny mistakes. The difference between early and naked. They're very similar. Early goes over your palm or your back of your hand. while naked goes from your wrist to your knuckle. So if you think about the curvature of the earth for early, how the sun goes over, and I don't know, naked is just, but many people make that mistake. It's so common. It happens. So there's a lot of mistakes out there, common mistakes that we make, and it's okay. Don't be afraid of your mistakes. Apologize for them if they're really bad. People understand, especially if you sign something and you're like, what? You can tell by their facial expression that something wasn't right. If you catch somebody's face and be like, did I sign something wrong? Let them tell you what you said, what they saw, and then you can like correct yourself if you have to. But mistakes are natural and they're okay. Key 3, review and feedback.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts of this is the review and feedback. So why should we review? Well, language is a learned skill. You have to go back and review what you learn in order to retain it. You can't just do it once and think, I'm cool. You have to review. It's through, what is that?
A flashlight.
Oh, through repetition. So we want to
Can I take
repeat-
the light on?
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We want to continue to go back and review over and over and over again to really help ingrain it into our mind. That over and over again means different things for different people. Some people can review it like 4 or 5 times and be good. Other people are like, hey, it's 50 or nothing for me. I've got to do it like so many. Whatever is best for you, how you review, how you retain, go for it. No one person learns one way. Everybody's different.
One quick point, just to backtrack to like learning as children. And one of the things that I really want to stress is don't strive for perfection. Strive to get better.
Yeah.
And that is such a roadblock for a lot of us included, because we want to get it right. And mistakes are ugly and we don't want to make them. And we're adults. We get embarrassed and we don't want to be wrong. And we don't want to offend anybody. But it's a new language. And if we wait until we are perfect, we're never going to be. We're kind of setting ourselves up for disappointment. So just one thing to kind of keep in mind is to don't strive for perfections, or sorry, don't strive to be perfect. Just strive to get better. And that means making mistakes along the way.
You're better at talking about that book, The Motivated Brain. So I'm going to let you talk about that.
Okay. So we're going to get a little nitty gritty and into some neurology. But I won't make it too complicated. So we focused a little bit on repetition and that transition from short-term to mid-term to long-term memory. And there's a saying in neurology is the neurons that fire together wire together. And the interesting thing about the brain is that these synapses, they make these physical connections, and it's very similar to how a muscle works. And we know if you want to get fit and we want to build up those muscles, what do we have to do? We have to repeatedly do those motions. You want bigger arms, you're going to have to do more arm exercises, right? And the more we do those, the more we're going to build up those muscles. And so our brain is very similar. So it craves that repetition. And so the more we can repeat something, those synaptic connections create a physical bridge. They're physically connecting in your brain. And it's really interesting. And there's a couple books. If you want to learn a little bit about how the brain learns, The Motivated Brain by Gail Gregory is an incredible resource. It's really good for teachers in particular, but also parents and those that are learning new languages. It really helps to know kind of how the brain ticks and what can activate the learning more efficiently. The second one that I actually might recommend a little bit more because it's a lighter read is Unlimited Memory, and it's written by Kevin Horsley. He's a grandmaster chess player, and he has the world record for memorizing the most digits of pi. 3.14159 2, 5, 6, and it goes on and on. And so anyways, somebody could tell him what's digit 3,532, and he's like, okay, it's 7 or whatever that number might be. And so he wrote this book about how you can develop a better memory. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he brought out is that memory isn't a trait. Like, we probably tell ourselves, I have a bad memory, right? But it's actually a skill, and it's something that can be developed, and it's something that you can improve on. Much like the brain and much like your muscles in your body, it's something that can be trained and improved and made stronger. So one of the things that he mentioned is a 3x3 strategy for repetition. And so again, short-term, mid-term, long-term. And so 3x3x3. And so review it 3 times really quickly. Maybe it's the same day, maybe it's that first week, but go back to what you learned as quickly as possible. So for example, I learned the sign frustrated today. I'm going to review that 3 times before the day's over. Okay, that takes care of the short-term memory. Let's move it up a notch. Let's go to mid-term memory. Let's review that sign 3 times in the first week. Okay, let's kick that up into long-term memory. Okay, now I'm going to review that sign 3 times in the first month. And so it doesn't have to be 3, 3, 3, but the principle is that if you learn something new, we want to review it a lot in the beginning and less over time. And it's just that getting that transition into your long-term memory is really what we want. And one thing I kind of wanted to touch on too is neuroplasticity. And this is really interesting because a lot of times we convince ourselves that because I'm older, it's harder to learn. And in recent years, because it was thought that, toddlers, their brains are on fire, right? They're just making connections and they're learning how to walk, how to talk, how to see and all these things. Teenagers too, their brains are just really on fire and they're just wired to be learning. But the really interesting thing about neuroplasticity is that your brain doesn't lose that over time. And so there's like my parents are kind of a good example of this. We all learned at the same time, and my parents would always complain that we were learning faster than they were because we were younger. But the interesting thing about our parents is that they are just as fluent as we are. Let's see, my mom's going to get mad at me, but she's turning 60 this year, and she's fluent in ASL, and so that it means that it's not impossible, right? And it might, in some cases, be a little bit more challenging. We might have more responsibilities. We might not be able to dedicate as much time to learning the language as those that are in their teenage years or 20s or 30s. But just know that it's not necessarily a biological limitation. Your brain still has the capacity to learn a new language, no matter how old you are. Steve Kaufman, I'm going to touch on him a little bit tomorrow about polyglots, but he's somebody that knows 20 languages fluently. 15 of those languages he learned in the last 5 years, and he's 70 something right now. So, don't let that be a roadblock.
15 in 5 years. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm still like mind blown by him.
You have something to say?
Are you going into feedback?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I like talking about feedback because that's my job professionally, is I train all of my interpreters. And one of the main things I do is provide feedback to them. And feedback is so important if it's done appropriately. A lot of times feedback is given where the person who's providing the feedback thinks they're doing a good thing, but in reality, they're damaging the person who's receiving that feedback because it's not being done appropriately. One of the reasons why you need to have feedback is because without it, you're not going to progress in the language. You're still going to make mistakes that you think are okay, that you don't even know they're mistakes. You need somebody to help you, to correct you, to boost you up, to like, we're just going to modify this just a little bit. But if it's done wrong, it can damage you. Sometimes what can happen is feedback turns into criticism. that's never okay. So be mindful when you do receive feedback to receive it from the right person. And one of the best ways to do that is to get what we call a language parent. And that can be like, oh, what? What is that? So a language parent is like a language buddy, somebody who's skilled in the language, who tries really hard to understand what you're saying, doesn't correct your every mistake, confirms your understanding, their understanding by, hold on. I'm getting confused by my own thoughts here. They support you in helping you boost you, saying yes, the signs you're using are correct. They're positive. They give you that positive feedback, and they help you continue to learn the language and to help you make progress. So you're thinking, well, who can that be? It can be anybody. They don't have to be like skilled, but somebody who's just a little bit more advanced than you to be that language buddy, somebody who can support you and you can support them, vice versa. You know, support is so important. You're always going to find somebody who's going to be critical. There's always that one person out there who's going to be judgy, who's going to be like, that's not how you sign that. You've been learning for how long? And you still sign like that? Oh, like, no. Take it with a grain of salt, but you don't need that kind of negativity when you're learning a language. What you want is somebody who can provide you that positive feedback to be like, it's okay. I noticed you signed it this way. Why? If you can explain your reason, oh, well, because I saw it here. Oh, okay. I just wanted to be sure because I've never seen that before. That's a language parent. That's somebody who isn't going to say it's one way or the highway. But if you're like, well, I learned it from this website and it's a reputable website. And then, oh, okay. Because there's so many ways to sign something. But never, ever allow somebody to discourage you because of their negative feedback. It happens so often where people receive such harsh feedback that they feel, you know what, maybe this language isn't for me. Maybe I'm in the wrong place. Maybe I'm not good enough to do this. I'm just going to give up. No. You're fine. They're wrong. You're fine. So never allow somebody's negative some of you might have already experienced that. You might have already experienced some negative feedback from people or some harsh criticism. Maybe some of you haven't yet, and you're like, whoa. If you haven't, that's great. Be mindful that those people are out there. If you have, you know what I mean by people who can kind of like nitpick at you and criticize. So be very careful when you do get that feedback from people. But feedback is important. When we take our certification exams, they don't just provide you a pass or failing grade. On my EIPA that I took, I passed, but I had like 2 pages worth of feedback from them. And they give the feedback, the positive, negative, positive. We thought you did a really good job here. Need to work on this, but you did really good here. And so that feedback, even though you're like, oh yeah, I could have, it still keeps you like boosted. You're like, oh, okay, I did a really good job. Same thing with, hey, what are you doing? What is she doing?
She wants pom-poms.
Yes, but why? She has these little, like, she calls them pom-poms, but they're like these little poof balls. I don't know. They're for arts and crafts. But anyway, so getting that positive feedback, that support is going to really help you in the language learning process. Just because without feedback, we can't fix our mistakes, but just make sure it's the right feedback. Don't allow somebody to squish you. That's this sign. I know you guys see us probably do this a lot. There's no word for this sign. Everybody's got their own word attached to it, and it's not even a word. It's like mine is the poof. It's like some people are inflate, deflate, but it's almost like your self-esteem. It's like, yeah, and then it deflates. Oh, so that's what that means. So you want to have somebody who like helps keep your self-esteem up while you're in this language learning process, because it is frustrating. You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to feel like, am I not progressing? You want that positive feedback. No, you are. Look at where you've come from to where you are now, and have somebody that's going to really help and support you. Any
Can I
word?
just say one quick thing?
Yeah.
Chris, you are a study in facial expression. That was so fun to watch you while she's talking. I'm like, ooh, this makes sense. You know, just it was fun.
Look at that.
Thanks. And the funny thing is that when I was younger, I was the least expressive person on the
He
planet.
was like Stonewall. It took
That's something
years
that I
for
had to
him.
learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
Aw.
Thanks.
See, babe? Told you were getting
I've been
better.
practicing.
I told you were getting better.
Yeah. At first, you know,
But yeah, it does get. Does anybody have any like questions or any like thoughts about any of this? The 3 keys of input, output,
the
and
3
feedback.
fundamental keys of language
That's
learning.
not my thing. I don't say that. He says that. That's why I'm like the 3 keys that he's the teacher,
You
not
know,
me.
the 3 keys, one for the car,
Oh.
one for
But
Oh,
does,
yeah.
but does anybody have like any thoughts, questions, concerns, or your own? Go ahead.
I have a question. In regards to the practice, I was told by a coworker to use like an ASL dictionary. So every time I try to practice, like use that dictionary when I don't know a word.
Mhm.
Do you recommend those that? And if you do, which app do you recommend?
Oh, an app.
Ah,
Well,
yeah. Did you want to take it?
I think ASL dictionaries are good. I do. If you're wanting to do an online dictionary, Sign Savvy is one. There's what's the other one? There's a lot. Sign Savvy is real popular.
ASL Pro.
ASL Pro.
This is my nerdy side, but if you are going into more academic, elementary ASL
Yeah.
concepts is a really good one.
Elementary ASL concepts is actually
Uh,
elementary ASL concepts is really good in general because it has a lot of basic signs. Like if you were going to be talking, and I mean it's out there. I mean, who knows? I don't know what you guys do professionally, but if you were talking about cause and effect, if you were explaining that to somebody, that dictionary has cause and effect, and so it has these just these signs that you would never really like think about except when you're involved in that conversation. But yeah, elemental ASL concepts. Sorry.
Yeah,
ASL
so
core, ASL clear for STEM. Oh, hand speak is another one. And then
Sign School, I just found.
which one?
Sign School.
Sign School is both online and an app. And it's pretty good. It's pretty accurate.
Oh, another app is it called the ASL app? But that one's developed by no, you can go to school tomorrow.
Please.
I know. You just want to learn, huh?
Please, can I go to school?
Tomorrow, baby.
But anyways, we'll go ahead and add that one to our not database, but to our resources page. And you said Signing School, and one of these days we'll have to start putting apps together. But usually what we recommend is that if you go to look up a word, what I found to kind of be the most easiest is to Google it, which probably isn't the best way, but it's actually a really good way to see a bunch of various ways of signing it. So you say, how do you sign deer in ASL, and go to the video tab, and you have a bunch of videos that you can kind of work through. And it's a really good way to kind of pick up on a common theme, because you probably find a bunch of different ways. Like we're saying, like Halloween, ASL Connect just posted this video of like, here's 8 ways to sign Halloween.
I know like 4.
Yeah, Julie, it's like, that's crazy, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
And, we've been doing this for well over a
8.
decade.
like 8 ways. Good grief. But yeah.
There's also sign ASL. Did you mention that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll add those
What's
two.
that?
I keep looking on our other screen right here. We have his resources pulled up because I was like, I can't remember all of the ASL dictionaries. And so you're adding the other ones.
Johnny,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is that buzz off?
Buzz off, like to, I'm
Oh,
going
like
to take
I'm gonna
off.
like take
I'm going to
off.
leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just watching ASL sign and she did it that way.
Yeah. Like I'm gonna like I'm out of here. I'm gonna leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's used for fast.
Well, that's
Like there's
different.
fast or for speeding.
Well, fast.
Sometimes they'll do, boom.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where like well, because it's true. So like how you said to like leave, it's leave and then it goes into an A. Where he's talking about fast goes into a fist. So it's the same motion, different hand shapes. So it can be kind of confusing if it's done like really like fast. You're like, did you just do fast or leave? And so, yeah. So to leave goes into an A. Fast would go into your fists. And so that's why I kind of wanted to be clear with that because it's the same hand motion, but 2 different hand shapes. But yeah, they're out there.
And again, it's one of those things that gets easier over time. And those patterns you'll start recognizing and you'll start getting a feel for how your local community signs. That's something that we were kind of, I always use this example because it's the easiest one to think of. It's like the sign for pizza. Like
Oh my
everyone on the
God.
planet, like maybe
Wait,
you have
wait.
learned the
Hold
sign
on.
for
I
pizza.
want him to know. How do you sign pizza? Pizza.
Okay,
pizza.
double Z, double Z, double Z. Ah, I see Jerry doing
Jerry
this one.
and Linda.
Linda too?
Yep, was doing okay. Pizza. Okay.
Julia doesn't like that one.
So we learned it. Pizza, the double Z. I thought that was universal. It's the sign for pizza until I moved to Central California. And one day at school, the student was like, "Oh, we're having this for lunch." And I'm like, "What is that?" And she's like, "Seriously?" I'm like, "Don't look at me like that." I'm like, "What is that?" And she's like, I'm like, "You can keep doing it, but I still don't understand." And so she's like, "Ugh." She goes, "Pizza." And I'm like, "You mean pizza?" She goes, "What is that?" I said, "What was that?" And so we like joked about it with each other. And I said,
Yeah.
"You sign pizza here?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "Where I'm from, we sign pizza." She goes, "Why?" I said, "Because of the 2 Z's." She goes, "Interesting." I said, "I know, right?" So I asked my boss, I said, "Hey, sign pizza." And she goes, "Pizza?" And I'm like, "Oh." I'm like, "Okay." I don't like this one because I don't like the way it makes my wrist feel. It's like all awkward.
Yeah.
You're like, huh? I don't eat pizza like this. I hold it like this and eat it. But I'm like, I don't eat pizza. It's weird. But so yeah, pizza is one of those that you're just. There's another one too. Like I've seen people sign pizza a couple, but yeah. But the 2 common ones that I see is pizza and pizza. You started it. You said pizza.
Did not. Hey. Okay, yeah, so yeah, if you haven't already, I included in today's resources a TED Talk by Chris Lonsdale. And if you haven't watched it yet, it's a really good watch. It's entitled gosh, I forgot what it's titled. How you can learn a language in 6 months. Something to that effect. But you can play fast and loose with the word fluent, but like by his definition, if you know 1,000 high frequency words, then you're about, oh boy, I should have looked at the stats before I did this. I think it was 80%.
I was gonna say it's 80%. 80%.
But then if you kick that up to 3,000 words, then you're up to 98%. And that statistic really kind of blew my mind. And he was saying that like in the English language, if you learn 3,000 of the most highly frequently used words, you're pretty much there. We don't need to learn, for the most part, like math or calculus or biology and like these other things that are just kind of naturally in our English lexicon. You just focus on the high frequency stuff. And so if you haven't watched that, it's a really good watch. And he has a lot of tips about the language parent, about high frequency language, about how to immerse yourself, how to get feedback, and a lot of those things that we touched on tonight. He touches on in that TED Talk.
What's his name?
Chris Lonsdale. So CHRIS LONSDALE. And I think if you YouTube how to learn a language in 6 months, I think he's number one. It's got a few million views, and it's a really good watch. And I think it's only about 10 to 15 minutes long. It's not too long to watch. He's a bit of a fast talker though. just a forewarning. So tomorrow, really quick. So the theme for tomorrow is going to be meals and eating and drinking. And so we have some, pizza.
Yeah. What are your favorite meals? What are your favorite drinks? So that'll be fun. And
tomorrow is actually going to be pretty interesting because it's Wednesday, and so we're going to open it up to our free ASL group practice session that we typically do. So it'll probably be a bigger pool of people to practice with. We'll probably have groups of 3, just to kind of have a buffer of if somebody gets dropped, they're not left alone.
Maybe 4, depending on how many we have. It's one of those.
Yeah.
It's a coin toss on the groups.
Yeah, it depends on skill levels, but it'll be a good match.
But the link is different for tomorrow.
Yeah.
There will be a different link. Now, you send those out.
So if you're on the webpage, the 7-day challenge on either Facebook or on the website, then that link is already in there. You just go to day 3 and you just use that link. The password is ASL group, no spaces, no capitals. But all that information is already there. You made what?
I'm making slime.
You're making.
Oh, she wants to make slime?
Not with these little puff balls.
I'm making slime.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the class tomorrow is how to learn like a polyglot. And polyglots are those people that know 15, 20 languages, and they just learn them one after another. So we're going to be discussing how they approach language learning and how that's kind of different than most of us approach language learning, and why it's so successful, and how we can kind of apply that to ourselves so we can learn sign language just much faster and kind of have a more enjoyable process along the way. And that's about it. Any questions for us before we end it tonight?
Yeah, Chris, which link are we using tomorrow?
So it's going to be, the Zoom link is going to be either in the Facebook group, day 3, or it's going to be on the website, the 7-day challenge. And you just scroll down to day 3, which is going to be for tomorrow, and you'll see the resources for meals and foods and drinks. And then that practice session link is there. You just click the link, and if it asks you for a password, the password is ASL group. All lowercase, no spaces.
Did you send out the email?
I did. I
to
sent out a
everybody?
newsletter. So if you're subscribed to our newsletters, I sent that out earlier today with that same link and with the password and with all the resources. So everybody's going to be using the same resources for tomorrow. So everybody should pretty much be on the same page and be able to understand each other. It's kind of why we've been doing the themes to kind of help that process a little bit better and to really hone in on a certain subject or topic. Okay. Any other?
The other sign for pizza, I'm looking at ASL sign.
Mhm.
She does it like this.
Like with a this?
Weird.
Yeah, the A hand is sticking up.
Oh,
That's a deep dish.
that's like holding on to that sucker. Man.
My pizza, you let go.
It's not Friday
Yeah,
yet.
there is one. I know. Friday nights are pizza night. I know some people will do pizza. We'll end it with an A.
Oh,
It's
pizza.
another
I've
variation
seen-
out there.
Yeah.
All right. It was really great talking to all of you this evening, and we really look forward to tomorrow. Hopefully you've been doing the challenges. If not, you can always catch up. And tomorrow's challenge is share what your favorite meal is with somebody else in ASL. Again, don't worry too much about the grammar. That'll come later. Part of the talking like a child, which I forgot to touch on. When we're learning as kids, 1-year-old, they use 1-word sentences. 2-year-olds, they use 2-3-word sentences. Syntax quite isn't there. The filler words aren't quite there, but you know what? That conversation happens, and we kind of have to go through that same process. So don't worry too much about the grammar. Just kind of put it out there and see what sticks. We'll talk a little bit more about ASL grammar. I think next Monday is when I have it scheduled. So have a good night. I know it's late for some of you guys. It's probably pushing 10 o'clock
Ugh.
for you people on the East Coast. I apologize. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yep.
And have a great night.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.